Thank you. I think certainly this promises to be a very interesting exchange going forward. I'm sure that you have amazing insights into the recent history. If I can pick up one point from what you have just said, yes, the existence of the State of Israel is now a fact. Many Arab countries have accepted that fact. There is one country that hasn't, to a point, and that is Iran. Iran remains something of a nemesis for the State of Israel, but it also has its very complicated and problematic relationship with its neighbors in the Gulf. Some of these problems go back a long way they have historical roots. Other problems have arisen in more recent years as a result of ideological differences and as a result of the somewhat aggressive tones of the Iranian Revolution, which don't seem to be abating with time as people had expected. How should Israel and the Arab states look at Iran? Is it good to look at it as a common enemy? Is it good to look at it as an awkward neighbor with whom it is necessary to build some contacts regardless? Or is there in the future the potential for Iran to actually become a constructive partner in the region and in the wider region, including Israel? I know this is a topical issue in Israel itself. Several Israeli governments in recent years have identified Iran as one of its biggest challenges. I wonder how you look at this.
Well, first of all, let me say this, that originally Iran was not an enemy of Israel. As of 1948 till 1979, which is almost 40 years, Israel and Iran had a very close relationship, a very friendly relationship. And it was not only a friendship between leaderships, it was also a friendship between peoples. In the 50s and the 60s, in the early 70s, I traveled to Iran many times. And I think that Iran, in my view, is one of the most fascinating countries in the Middle East. I will say more than that. I think that Iran and Israel are ideally situated because we don't have a common border. We don't have a dispute on territory. We're not going to, we don't have an interest per se to go to war on any issue, particular issue whatsoever, except should we say, the idea of the present leadership in Iran that the existence of Israel per se is unacceptable. And therefore, of all the countries in the region, supposedly, Iran should have been the easiest one with which we could have common relations. And we did have very, very considerable relations with Iran. Again, not necessarily in the military field, also in the military field, but not only in the military field. And we had economic interests, common economic interests. We built a pipeline for transferring Iranian oil through Israeli territory into the Mediterranean. This was a pipeline which was active for many years. And this is also an enterprise, which is a strategic enterprise, and it is a business enterprise. So we had all the reasons to have good interests with Iran. And then came a new regime in Iran. And when the new regime came into power, shall we say, the scenery changed. And the leadership became a religious leadership. when you have a situation where the religious leadership is also the political leadership of a country, you're in trouble, because religion by definition cannot compromise. And I'll give you a small example of how religion worked in Iran. If you will recall, there was a war between Iran and Iraq for almost 8 years in the 80s. And the war resulted in the deaths of millions on both sides of the divide. And at one particular point in time, the United States decided that it was in the interests of the free world, as it was called, to help Saddam Hussein to not only stand up to Iranian aggression, but also to win the war. And the United States provided Iraq under Saddam Hussein, not only with weaponry, but intelligence, which was critical to enable Iraq to change the fortunes of war. And Iraq began shelling and attacking the Tehran. And one morning, the religious leader of Iran, Khomeini, got up and said, we will have a ceasefire, which is something which he never contemplated before. And when he was asked by people around him, how can you say so? But just yesterday you said that we should never have a ceasefire with these infidels. And he looked up with his finger, he said, that is the will of God. Now, when you have God as your strategic source of inspiration and source of interest, it also means to say that you are also the interpreter of God. And when you have the power of interpreting God for the future and destiny of your country, then you can also reach the point where God can change his views just as he changed his views on the war between Iraq and Iran. And in this respect, I think we should look at how to go about this in trying to begin to talk to the Iranians in a meaningful way about how we're going to look at the next century or two. And I say this doesn't have to be an open dialogue. It doesn't have to be a dialogue in which people initially make political concessions. It means talking. Because my experience in my profession has been that one of the most powerful interests which we're interested in protecting were better served by talking than going to war. Or as Churchill once said, talk is better than war. And I don't think that this is something imminent, but it's something which we should not escape. I think in the end, we have to bring the Iranians to a point where they will realize that in the interests of their country, they must begin thinking of things otherwise. We have not reached that point yet. We have not reached that point at all. The latest attempt has been the JCPOA, the agreement between Iran and the 5+1 in 2015, the agreement on shall we say, the hiatus or cessation of Iran's progress towards a nuclear military capability. So far, this agreement, for a variety of reasons, has not turned out to be an agreement which brought about the desired conclusion. But this does not mean to say that we should give up on it. And I think that in the end, there will come a moment, I can't say when it'll be, it might probably not be in my lifetime, because I'm slightly younger than you. I'm shortly hope to mark my 87th birthday, so I don't believe I have all that long to go, certainly not another 87 years. But I do believe that talking is a very important asset in all our dealings. And one of the things that I have found in my profession and in my work as also as a diplomat is that the art of talking is probably no less important than the art of fighting.
I think whilst we are waiting for divine intervention to perhaps change policy in Iran, there is one or several ideas that have been floated in the think tank community in a very low-key kind of way for the moment, which is the possibility of creating some kind of regional platform that can bring all the parties together to discuss hardcore security issues, but also some tangible areas of cooperation. So, of course, in Europe, we have the experience of the CSCE, the Helsinki Final Act. It was signed, at the peak of the Cold War, when people thought an agreement between the Soviet Union and its allies and the United States, NATO and its allies was quite impossible. But after 12 years of very hard diplomatic negotiations, it happened, and it remains, the Helsinki Final Act remains one of the core pillars on which Europe is built. Do you see in the future, within your lifetime, the possibility that such a collaborative framework can develop in the Middle East, perhaps not covering the whole region, but certainly involving Israel, certainly involving the Gulf states and Egypt? Is this something that is possible, either in a modest way or in an ambitious way, if you want, also involving Iran, as we are saying, if there is a change of heart in Tehran?
Let me say this. There are many ways of going about this. One of the ways is what is called in the diplomatic jargon, the track two approach. Track two. Track two organizations exist around the world. These are places where people meet unofficially. They come from various countries around the world, and they get together and they talk. One such organization is an organization that has the name Pugwash, Pugwash. Pugwash is the name of a small little village in Canada where these people first met. And over the years, the Pugwash organization developed, and it has been a kind of a testing ground for people to talk at each other sometimes talk with each other, and there are other such ones. I'll give you a small example of this, of a Pugwash success, if you can call it that. And that is an event which took place after the 67 war. The 67 war was a watershed in the history of the Middle East. It was the war in which Israel gained control of the entire West Bank and also established itself on the Golan Heights in the north, and also established itself in Sinai in the south, and also took over the Gaza Strip. And one of the things that happened during this war was that one of the two major powers in the world at that time, the Soviet Union, of course led by Russia, but the Soviet Union, cut off diplomatic relations with Israel and withdrew its embassy. And from 67 to up to 72, there were no contacts whatsoever between Israel and the Soviet Union, although, as I mentioned earlier on, in the War of Independence, the Russians were helpful in more than one way and were a factor in helping us to survive, and not only to survive, but also to, from our point of view, to win the war. And at one of these Pugwash conferences in 1972, held somewhere in Europe, a Russian figure contacted an Israeli figure and said to him, you know, we've been in a state of no contact whatsoever for over 5-7 years. This should not be something in our interest. Let us set up a channel of discussion. And the Israeli, who was a person who had contacts and also a position in the Israeli system, I don't want to say more than that at the moment, came back and reported to him. He reported, and a channel was established. It was established. It did not prevent the Yom Kippur War a year later. It didn't prevent Russia entering the events of the Yom Kippur War in a way which in Washington was interpreted as the danger of a World War III, including nuclear weapons. But a channel was established. And as a result of this, after the Yom Kippur War, the channel was shall we say, revived. And this channel existed for, how should we say, for almost 25 years or so. Let me show you something. This is a book. I hope you see the book. This is a book. You see the writing on it? You see it
Yes.
well? Good.
Yes.
This is a book which the name of which is Russia and the Arabs. It was written by a man called Yevgeny Primakov.
Indeed.
Yes, and Yevgeny Primakov, if you see the name, yes?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes. Yevgeny Primakov was the Russian figure on one side of the divide for quite some time. He went on to become head of the KGB. He went on to become foreign minister of Russia, and he became also prime minister of Russia. And when he died, President Putin personally attended his funeral and said he was the greatest figure in the Middle East policies of Russia throughout many, many years. This book contains 50 pages on the relationship, the secret relationship between Israel and Russia at the time. It is an interesting book. Mr. Primakov was a man who I knew, who I met more than once. I will not go into that further than that, but I will say that this was at a time when there was no official relationship between Russia and Israel. For over 20 years, we had a channel. We could talk to each other. And ultimately, Russia reestablished its relations with Israel after the first round of war with Iraq in 1991. And this is something in which you have to have patience. This organization, the Pugwash organization, was an organization which received the Nobel Prize for Peace. The prize for peace was awarded to this organization. And the person who established it, Dr. Joseph Rothblatt, was a Jew. He was not an Israeli, he was a Jew. And he got a personal prize for peace from the Norwegians. Prize for peace and his contribution to world peace. Because he established this organization for one purpose, and that was to try to free the world of nuclear weaponry. And when he died, he hadn't achieved the aim. But the fact of the matter was that from the moment after World War II, there was never any time in which, up to now, nuclear weaponry was again used in combat. And I very much hope and pray, as we should all pray, it will never be used again. And therefore, these contacts in which you talk a lot, sometimes you talk for hours and then there are 2 sentences which are important and the rest are not. But ultimately, they are important because they are a kind of a valve, a small little valve, which prevents all the air coming out of the tire. And it's important. And I think that what the Gulf states have done is they've opened up a big opportunity, a host of opportunities of making themselves critical, maybe available for all kinds of get-togethers of one kind or another. It's important because, as I said in the end, human beings can only be convinced by looking at each other eye to eye and discussing the future and fate of humanity on this globe.
I was very touched by your words. As somebody who has been involved with Track 2 initiatives for 30 years, I highly value your words and how you have assessed the Track 2 contribution to world peace. I was inspired by Pugwash when, as a young man, I was thinking about where to concentrate my life. And I think you're absolutely right that they have made a very unique contribution, not only in terms of the content that they have put in, but also in terms of inspiring people to work on these topics. In my case, I was not involved with the Middle East. I was involved with the Caucasus region and the former Soviet space. But everything that you said about the importance of dialogue, the importance of patience, the importance of taking the long view, I find to be very inspiring and very, very essential advice to anyone working on these issues. Mr. Halevi, to conclude this conversation for today, we cannot really do justice to the issues that we are discussing if we leave out the fact that in Israel's relations with the neighboring countries, the Arab countries and other countries, the question of the future of the Palestinian people and how they fit into this picture is always going to be one of the main challenges. In the same way that the Arab countries have realized that Israel is never going to go away, it's there to stay. I think also Israelis understand that the Palestinian problem is not something that's going to disappear. It's going always to be there and it has to be dealt with. There is a new government in Israel now, one that brings some interesting perspectives perhaps to these issues. What do you see the next steps? We know there's a long history. You spoke about it very eloquently in this conversation earlier on. But what are the next steps now? Where do we go from here on the Palestinian issue?
I think, to the best of my knowledge, the the new government in Israel has not yet sat down to face these issues in depth. We have had the COVID-19 threat, which has been occupying a large chunk of our time. We have what we call the Iranian threat, which is on our doorstep. I would like to say Israel has never said that it wishes to destroy Iran. No Israeli leader has said that the dream of Israel is to destroy Iran. Unfortunately, and I'm saying this not in order to gain points, we do know that the Iranian leadership to this moment do see the destruction of Israel as one of their key targets sometime in one way or another. So there's a lot of work to be done to get the Iranians talking the right way. And even as we speak now, there have been events in the Gulf in the last few days which show that tension is rising. And I think this is probably, in terms of the immediate, the question of maritime traffic, the question of whether ships can safely go about their business in international waterways is something which is going to be very much on the agenda of the international community. So I'm not sure that this is a possibility at this moment. I do think that we should not simply abandon this issue. We cannot and should not. But I also think, since you mentioned that there is a new government in Israel, I think there is also a necessity for the Palestinians, after so many years of trotting out their same, shall we say, talk themes and positions, to revisit some of their basic rhetoric. I think this is very important. I attended a meeting, a track 2 meeting, by the way, of a different type, a year or two ago, and there was a Gulf foreign minister there, and he's told a leading Palestinian figure there at this meeting, look, what you're saying to me today is what you've been saying for the last 70 years, and nothing has changed. After 70 years, don't you think it's worthwhile for you and your colleagues to sit down and see whether the time has not come to say something else? That there should be a different rhetoric, a different way of talking, maybe explore new views. If you repeat yourself ad nauseum, ultimately people are going to, not to ignore you, but are going to lose hope for the moment and say, well, there's no point in talking to these people because we know what they're going to say, and we don't necessarily have the time and the effort to devote our assets to this. I think that the time has come for the Palestinians also to think of a new leadership of sorts. The Palestinian leadership has not changed or ever, and except for the death of Arafat. But there's nothing new to be said there, and even the Hamas has not said something new. Although Hamas, we can talk, and that's a different story. Hamas is not the same story as the Palestinian Authority or the Palestinian Fatah movement. These are two separate players here, and one has to look at them very seriously. I certainly look at them very seriously. And I have been one who was publicly advocated a dialogue between Israel and Hamas, although I'm a minority view. But I am used to being a minority view in the hope that I'll become a majority view. And one should never lose hope. I think it's a moment in time in which both sides, not only one side, should reconsider its rhetoric. We've tried all the tricks in the game of using force, and we have certainly, in terms of force, have also had singular successes. The Palestinian side has tried force and has not had successes. And the question is whether it's the right time to think of something else, something fresh, something different. I think if there's something that the Gulf states can do, and by the way, the Gulf states know and have met the leadership of the Palestinian groups more than once in various ways. Many Palestinians have lived in the Gulf. Many Palestinian leaders have spent long periods of their life in the Gulf, and still do, by the way. The time has come to revisit this and maybe see whether something else can be done. I think that if there would be a feeling in Israel that the other side is going to revisit its rhetoric, I think it would be probably shall we say, an event which could fire the imagination on the Israeli side too.
Mr. Afraim Halavi, thank you very much for this very inspiring conversation in which you laid out many interesting points and ideas. As you mentioned right at the beginning, these are topics that require longer time to unpack, assess, analyze. But I think in the last 1 hour, you managed to cover a very wide range of topics in a very positive and interesting way, which I'm sure that our listeners and our subscribers will find inspiring. I look forward to talking to you again in the near future to try to go deeper in some of these issues, because I'm sure that there is much to learn from your experience and from your very wide knowledge of both the issues and the personalities concerned. The region gives a lot of importance to personalities, and you clearly have met many of the key players. And I'm sure that there are many things that you can say that will be also very useful for those who are thinking for the future. I appreciate the fact that you were able to go back and forth from the past to the future. This is extremely important because although as a historian, I appreciate the importance of knowing the past, but as a practitioner, I know that we need to be focused on the future. And I think you've done that wonderfully. Thank you very much, sir, for your time. And we look forward to our next conversation.